This video is about the incredibly versatile sliding table saw. I'll show you some methods and techniques that I employ on this fantastic machine, some jigs and fixtures that will help tremendously to make cuts that could be otherwise kind of tricky, and of course a few tips and tricks along the way. I also share a little info on some adjustment. However, this video focuses more on the usage of an already well-tuned slider. This is an excellent method for squaring the crosscut fence on a slider. I've been employing this for decades. You initially make a cut and then rotate the piece 4 times on a panel, and the larger the better. Once you make 4 cuts, you make a 5th cut and you measure that incremental error, a cumulative error if any. I recently found a fantastic PDF showing the details of this process and available from valleywoodworkers.org. I'll leave a link in the description. Here's an excellent way to true up your blade, make it 90 degrees, and you just take a board, and here I'm cutting a straight edge, but you could use a joiner, and then I'm going to rip this to width, right? And the idea is that I need this slightly less than the maximum height of the blade. We'll then move the fence out of the way and remove the guard. I'm going to put a line as a reference on one side or one face of that board. Incidentally, this works excellent for a chop saw as well. So here I'm going to raise the blade just about to the maximum height. We'll cut that board in 2 pieces. Now you can see, flip one over and put it on a known flat surface. Any gap will tell you whether you're square or not. So if you have a hammer K3, here's something that you should check. I was a little surprised that mine was out as far as it was, and that is this carriage needs to be parallel or coplanar with the top of the slider part. So let me grab a straight edge. So you just need a good quality straight edge. This is probably not the best. This is a Stabila 5-footer, but it'll work. And so placing this here, I put pressure down right here where the slider is, and I noted that this was off a little bit. It had dropped down. Here it was even worse. Now be careful when you're doing this. You don't want to put pressure over here. That'll give you a false reading because the slider is going to be slightly higher than the main cast iron part of the table. So anyway, I moved this to this position and put pressure here, and I noticed that I had a little bit of a gap on this side. Super easy adjustment. Loosen this nut, and then there is a set screw, an Allen head set screw. Looks like 5mm and 17mm. Loosen one, adjust that to bring this up or down. I had to bring mine up quite a bit, actually. It had about a 3mm gap there, so this whole thing was slightly twisted, and so super easy adjustment. If you're ever cutting a bunch of panels and you've laid up a veneer or even formica or whatever, ideally you would hold it back so you don't have to trim that, right? Something like this, just hold it back, and then you go to square them up and you're not having to mess with that overhang. Or if it's just a little bit, you can do something like this. I've used some double stick tape to put that on there, and then this would go over that. Not this piece, it's just a sample for the video. And then you don't have to mess with, trimming that. Now, if it's a bunch of overhang, sure, you want to do that so it doesn't, that vulnerable edge doesn't break. In this situation, I'm using this piece because I've already trimmed these, but there's a little bit of glue hanging out, and my flush bit, router bit has been sharpened so it doesn't quite cut flush. I don't really want to sand this or use a hand plane. I really don't want to use a hand plane because it has glue on it. But I don't want to alter this and get this out of square because that's going to be my reference point. This area here is nice and true. A little bit of glue so I can get past that by adding this dude with some double stick tape. Put that against there, and then I can make my cuts. Here I'm cutting these panels to length, and this is the bottom, this is the top, and these are wild. So I want to make this wenge, this foot of this panel, 2 1/4. So what I've done first is I've just trimmed that 2 1/4 just for the first one. I have several of these to do, and so to make them all the same rather than marking them, I trimmed this first one at 2 1/4. Then I just found a scrap piece of material. The measurement is arbitrary, and I can put it there, line that up, bring my fence over to it. Now I can do all of them the same way. Once I have all these bottom edges cut and 2 1/4 from the bottom edge to here, then I can set my fence, turn these around, and make these cuts, establishing the height of this panel and keeping everything nice and square. Here's another one for you. So we've got this established where that's going to cut, right? And I want to back this edge up so this doesn't splinter out, blow out. So I can use a backup, and to really focus that pressure right there, I like using a clamp. Okay. And to focus that pressure, I'll add a spacer right here. This is a piece of plywood, so it kind of bends. And by bringing that out, that focuses all that pressure right where I want it. Because I can't get this clamp right against the blade where I really want to focus that pressure. I need to stay somewhat away to clear the guard. This way, that puts the pressure right there where I want it. That's ready to cut. For those of you that don't know, this saw utilizes a scoring blade, and as the name implies, it's a small blade before the main blade, and it only raises up, well, it's adjustable, but in my case, I have it raised about 1 millimeter, not even a 1/16, and that makes a scoring cut ahead of the main blade, allowing the main blade to follow its path, making a beautiful, perfect cut. Here you can see that the backup did its job, splinter-free cut, as did the scoring blade. Here's the panel complete. Yeah, man, beautiful. It's such a pleasure to use a scoring blade, knowing that you're going to get splinter-free cuts, top and bottom. And then with the backup, splinter-free on the edge as well, yeah? This clip shows the proper use for cutting some panels, and I start by using the scoring blade to make some cross cuts. Trim the end. You should always trim your factory ends or edges. My rip fence is already set. Bring the panel over. You can see the crosscut sled or crosscut fence is forward and out of the way. You should never use the rip fence and the crosscut fence at the same time. So here's a basic procedure for squaring up a board. This is a sink cutout, Formica sink cutout. You can see the edges are not true. They're not perfectly straight. They're cut out with a jig and a router. And I need to square all that up. And the sliding table saw is the perfect machine for the job. So of course, using the slider, you'd make your first cut. That's your reference edge. And continue to rotate, making those cuts. Or you could have the rip fence set up and use that reference edge to make your cut and continue to make cuts that way, right? Or you can use your slider fence, which is a really cool aspect of a slider because now you're using your slider scale and your rip fence scale for 2 different dimensions. All right, so I'm getting ready to cut a miter on this piece of maple, and you'll notice how I have this piece oriented in relationship to the blade. This is going to be my good piece. This obviously will be the fall off. Now, you can see I'm cutting with the grain on this side. This fall off piece is actually against the grain. This is a piece that I'm favoring. So once I make that cut, let's pretend that I'm going to hand plane these edges, both of them. Well, I would obviously run the hand plane in this direction on this piece, and I would run it that direction on that piece. I'm cutting with the grain. This is also cutting with the grain if the hand plane went that way. So I'm favoring this piece, which is my piece of choice, that's fall off. So it does make a difference how you place your piece when you're cutting, whether it's a table saw or a chop saw. So I made a small sample here at the chop saw to show you. The left side is a better cut that favors the direction of the blade. And the right side, well, I call that an okay cut. You can see it slight splintering. As a matter of fact, here's a close-up. You can see the splintering on the right side where the left side, that's a favorable cut. It's cutting with the grain, and the cut is nice, crisp, and clean. Here's a tip, and this would be applicable for those not even using a slider. This just works in many situations, whether you're at the chop saw, maybe using a crosscut sled on your table saw, and it involves using ordinary masking tape. So I need to trim a tad more off this board. I don't want to move a fence. I know I need about half a 64th, 1/128th of an inch. So 2 pieces of tape will achieve that. I know from experience that 4 pieces of masking tape will give me 1/64th of an inch. I can use that knowledge to my advantage. So here's a great example of the scoring blade in action. I'm cross-cutting a bunch of pieces that are kind of narrow, so I pull the main fence back, the rip fence, I pull it back, which is the beauty of a sliding table saw. Trim that factory edge. Then I'm utilizing the scoring blade to make cut after cut. It's safe, easy, and both sides will be chip free. That's fantastic. You may have noticed a habit I have of lifting the board after I make each cut. I make the cut, I lift the board as I push it to the fence. That way I don't trap unnecessary sawdust between the edge of the board and the rip fence. Works amazingly well. Alright, so the next few clips are going to show these shop-made hold-down clamps in action. They're super versatile and easy to make. Alright, so I'm cutting some stakes for our garden. They're about 4 feet long, made of poplar. I'm trimming the ends to a point. And so what I've done is I've clamped a block of wood, that black piece of wood. It actually has sandpaper on the bottom, so it'll grip very well. Clamped it down with those shop-made hold-down clamps. And then I'm using a little hook just to hold that piece in place. Keep my fingers well out of the way. Yeah, I gotta say, the versatility of a sliding table saw is truly unmatched. They are just so useful for so many different applications. If you're a woodworker thinking about getting one, you will certainly not be disappointed. So, these things came out fantastic. Check it out. I've got this aluminum block in here that I made to fit, and I tapped it with this 3/8 by 18 thread. This guy drops over that. You can see it's elongated, so I can do different thicknesses, right? Drop that on there. A star nut or whatever you call them. Boom, super secure. And then this is just a spacer block, right? Just a cleat. And this goes in the groove. And this edge designates the left side of my blade. And so I can bring this up to here. It's kind of a go, no-go gauge block. And I can see that I'm going to be cutting about a 1/16. And so the front, of course, you can just eyeball how much you want to cut. You could even do tapers with this thing. So yeah, super secure and safe. And now straight. Derito. I'm needing a couple of parts that are angled like that, so I have a board big enough to get both of them. And I could line up my marks on the left side of the blade by doing that, and then I believe you've seen this, where I could take maybe a straight edge and line up that mark. But there's another way to do it, using the right side of the blade. And so what I can do is take a scrap. This is 11 5/16. Put my saw on 11 5/16 right there. And then I can line up those marks somewhere in there. Clamp that down. Then when I make my cut, I know that that piece is going to be perfect. Okay, so that was one method of using the right side of the blade. Here's another way, and maybe even a better way, by utilizing the left side of the blade. So what I can do, this front mark, I can line it up pretty well with the scoring blade or the main blade. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly clamp this down. Somewhere in there. And then with this gauge block, I can take a straight edge and line up this rear mark. And as I mentioned, that front mark, I can see it pretty clearly with the scoring blade. So right in there, that looks pretty good. I can clamp that down further. And if I was making one cut, that would be the end of it. If I'm making multiple cuts, you could mark this on your saw, or a better solution, what I could do is I could take a scrap of material and just cut a 90-degree cut in it, which is what that corner is. Clamp that down, and then I can just keep feeding repeated pieces to make that exact cut. Here you can kind of see the threaded bars that stay or live within the sliding part of the table saw. Check this out, this is really cool. So I'm trying to cut this piece of poplar at a 22, the complementary angle of a 22.5-degree cut. Okay, so that's 22.5 degrees on a chop saw. Super easy to do, but I'm trying to cut the complementary angle, which is like that. So anything past 45-degree cut is kind of tricky and potentially dangerous. Not on the Hammercade 3 slider. So I've got this fence set on 22.5 degrees. By putting it like this, perpendicular to it, that is the complementary angle of a 22.5-degree cut. That's what I'm after, and now it's safe and secure. Here I've finished this marquetry panel, and I want the grain, which is running at an angle, I want that grain to be parallel with the edge. So yeah, slider is a perfect tool for that. All right, that is part 1 of sliding table saws. I hope you got some good use out of this video. Be sure to check out part 2 of sliding table saws. I have some more tips and tricks of this incredibly versatile machine. And as always, thanks a ton for watching.